we all have the same number of hours in a day, but I'm sure you've heard this sort of truism: if you have something you need to get done, give it to the busiest person in the room. Why is that? Because often the person we perceive as getting a lot more done is also masterful at bending time, at making things happen. And there are a lot of ways we can do this. So one of the ways that is really important, in my opinion, is not multitasking.
Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, your weekly inspiration for post-PhD career development, with me, David Mendez. Today I have the pleasure of having with me Michelle Niemeyer. Michelle is a speaker, coach, and former attorney who teaches professionals how to bend time so they can stay sharp, productive, and profitable without burning out. After finding her way to burnout and back in her own high-performing legal career, Michelle created The Art of Bending Time, a framework that helps people connect the dots across work, life, and purpose to magnetize success and reclaim their joy. She helps businesses retain top talent, boost development, and keep their people energized and engaged, all while making the magic happen. Michelle, I'm so happy to have you here. I think graduate students, young researchers need to hear what you have to share, need to hear your story and your reflections and insights. So I'm super happy you are here today.
Thank you, David. And as you know, I went to law school, so I was once one of those graduate students.
There you go. So you know what we're talking about.
I certainly do. And I also know about coming into a career very excited and really giving it everything and not having a sense of balance going into it.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think a lot of us do. We don't realize we're doing it until it's too late. So I'm so excited to have the opportunity to speak to your audience who are before they're getting to a place where they might find themselves in trouble, as opposed to they're already there and they're trying to find their way back from it.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to come back from.
Yeah, it's tougher. But yeah, we're talking about people mostly at the end of their academic journey or at the beginning of their professional journey. And the ones who have most questions and most doubts are the ones who actually are looking for a way to find a job out of academia. That's a huge, that's a whole obstacle right there. The language, the culture. A lot of people out there have anxiety and need some tools in some ways to deal with all those unknowns and all that trial and error that comes when you pivot. And I know you're going to have great stories and insights to share on that. So Michelle, let's start with your story of being in this trajectory, hitting an obstacle, and I'll let you tell the audience what it was, and then needing to kind of reassess a bunch of things and understand, okay, starting today, I need to do things a different way. It doesn't mean I failed. It doesn't mean, there's no issue. It just means there's a different version of how I do things that needs to be built. And now I need to create my own tools to build it. So I'll let you share a little bit about that, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so I'll give a little bit of my backstory. I don't want to spend too much time on that because I'd rather spend time on ways that we can help people find their own way. And I will tell you, everything that I recommend people do is really very individualized. We're all different. We have different things that make us happy. We have different things that we're excited about. We have different skill sets and things that we feel are our purpose. So, from that perspective, really, it's so important that you get to know who you are and what matters to you. And one of the things, so I came out of school, and I will tell you, probably I was on the wrong path from a somewhat young age because the system put me into a box because I did well in school. How many of us are that person, right? So you're a straight A student. they say to you, oh, you should go to graduate school, or you should be a doctor, you should be a lawyer, you should be XYZ because you're good at math, or because you're good at science, or because in my case, you're good at reading and writing and, more argumentative type stuff. It was law school. For me, in the end, really, I am a very physical person. I like to move around a lot. I like to be connected to people. I want to see results somewhat quickly. Everything about law is the opposite of that. As a lawyer, you're isolated a lot. You work at your desk a lot. Once in a while, maybe you get lucky and you get to go to court. That happens less and less now than it used to. So what I found was that I was in a career path that wasn't giving me the things that light me up. And over a long period of time, I started getting very burned out. And I liken being burned out to being like a lobster in a pot that's getting cooked. So you don't really know you're in the pot. And then it's kind of, you start not feeling as good. It might be, for some people, it's extreme pressure. For some people, for me, it was frankly very high levels of chronic stress, but so normalized that I stopped realizing I was in chronic stress, if that makes sense. And that happens to a lot of people, I think, in professions like doctors and lawyers. I have a friend who's a doctor who became very burned out, and she experienced similar things where it's just the stress becomes so normalized that you don't even realize how it's affecting you until you remove yourself. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, it's like a veil is lifted. So I got burned out, and I got to a point where I knew I was burned out. And I started doing things that I knew to do to help, like exercising, like making sure to get enough sleep, trying to get myself out and see my friends more, things like that. And I thought everything was starting to be better. And then I had this episode where I had really bad pain in the night, and I ended up going to the hospital emergency room. It was so bad. It was like 2 nights in a row, actually. The first night I powered through, and I just, eventually I fell asleep. The second night, I thought I had appendicitis, and I went to the hospital. They did a bunch of tests. They sent me away with, maybe you have gallstones. We're not really sure. We can't see them in the ultrasound, but the blood labs look like you have gallstones. And at that point, I don't really like doctors. I did not follow up with a gastroenterologist, and I just changed my diet in the way that you would do to deal with gallstones. And the pain went away. And so I thought everything was fine. I thought I was doing better. And then a year later, I had an infection, and I went to the doctor, and they did blood testing, and the labs that were elevated at the hospital were twice as high a year later. And it was very high, like the normal of this one thing, alkaline phosphatase. The high end of normal is 120. Mine was at 480. So, it was very high. And that led to me being diagnosed with an autoimmune liver disease, which is a very scary diagnosis. If you look it up online, you start seeing things like 10-year lifespan, and likely you need a transplant at some point, and scary, scary stuff. And so that was my line in the sand moment. It wasn't really about burnout. It was about, okay, I think I fixed the burnout. I'm good. Think I'm doing well. And then I get hit with this diagnosis, which is just terrifying. And so I went to a health coaching school to learn how to do nutritional, functional health type stuff, which is very effective with autoimmunity. What you find with people with autoimmune diseases is a lot of times the doctors, what they'll tell you is, we don't know what causes it. We can't cure it. And here's this drug we have that might help. And I wasn't willing to accept that as the end result. So I learned a lot about stress management, about eating differently, about moving my body differently, about ways you can test yourself for food intolerances and that kind of thing. And I changed I virtually everything, really, in how I lived my life. I mean, and it wasn't like I did everything all at once because I didn't know what I needed to do. But I made a lot of changes over time. And I hit a point several years later. This diagnosis was about 10 years ago. I'd say 5 years into that, I hit a point where I was like, wow, I like my job again. I'm seeing the joyful, happy things again. I'm feeling really good. I feel like I did before I got burned out. I feel like I did before law school. Right. And why is that? And I looked back and I looked at the things that, all the kinds of things that I changed and how that might have impacted this. And then I also looked at who was I when I didn't know I was burned out yet, when I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put a label on it. What did I think was wrong? And I realized that I had bought a time management course during that time frame. When I thought that I was starting to get burned out and I was feeling like I can't get things done. I'm spinning my wheels all the time and I'm just not effective. And that made me realize what I really needed wasn't time management at all. I did get a handful of helpful hints from that time management class. But the bottom line was that what was going on wasn't about time management. It was about focus and clarity and physical and mental health. And it was about being just absolutely clear on who I am, what I want, and then making those things happen through my goals and having barriers to protect myself from the things that were taking away from me.
No, and you mentioned time, and then one of the things that intrigued me is, the art of bending time. It's a very intriguing title to me because time, one of the first things that a grad student tells me when I say, well, you should prepare for your career pivot starting today, even if you're in first year graduate school, it's a moment to start. You should start now. First thing they say is, oh, but I don't have time, especially if they're PhDs in past their first half, of the PhD. But time is so often the thing that the word and the concept that we will use to say no to things, to invitations, to experiences, to say, well, no, sorry, I don't have the time. My time is all allocated. No, sorry, we can't meet. And sometimes it's very, you can say that because your schedule for the week. But what I see with graduate students is this overarching kind of looming thing of this escaping time, in which it's no longer logical anymore, or it's no longer definite anymore. It's like the baseline is I don't have time for anything else than this work that I'm doing. And it expands to the infinite, or at least to the moment when I get my degree. When I get my degree, then I'll recover time.
So first of all, you said something I think is really important, which is that this habit people have of going to I don't have time as their immediate response to anything that's not about their schoolwork or about their obligations. So, and that happens in every profession. It's not just graduate students, it's everybody especially when they're hitting a point of burnout. And I see that as a sign of burnout, is when someone stops having any interest in anything or starts feeling so overwhelmed by the sense of obligation that they decide they can't go to the family event, they can't go to the party, they can't take a vacation, they can't go hiking on Saturday, whatever it is, right? And the thing that happens that I find fascinating is that we all have the same number of hours in a day.
Yep.
But I'm sure you've heard this sort of truism: if you have something you need to get done, give it to the busiest person in the room.
You've heard it, yes.
Why is that? Because often the person we perceive as getting a lot more done is also masterful at bending time, at making things happen. And there are a lot of ways we can do this. So One of the ways that is really important, in my opinion, is not multitasking.
Mm.
So a lot of people think they can multitask.
Yeah.
There's a lot of science out there that says that our brain doesn't work that way. And that when we're multitasking, basically we're just depleting our brain neurotransmitters as we bounce back and forth like a ping pong ball between one thing and another. And every time we do that, we lose focus, and it takes time for us to get back to being focused, which means it takes us significantly more time to get a task done.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Think about how often you're doing that when you allow your phone notifications to come on when you're talking, or when you're writing something, or when you're trying to read or do research. And now all of a sudden you're reading a paragraph, and then you look at your phone, and then you've lost your place, and now you have to go back to it. And the next thing you know, you've spent twice as long as you needed to do the same thing. And so that's one thing that, I always tell people is right away, like there are things that we can do, clarity being the first. And I don't use clarity in the task itself. I actually work with people to find clarity in what I call the sparks that light them up. What are the things that you get joy out of, the little micro moments? They're not big things. It's not like buying a new car or going on that big vacation. It's the little things like the smell of the coffee in the morning, or looking at your best friend and laughing about something spontaneously, or seeing the light shining on the water when you're walking by in the park. Like whatever kind of things light you up. And it could be physical movement. It could be listening to music. It could be a lot of different things depending on how you process. So I go through an exercise with people, and I have them, we do a meditation, and then they do some journaling where the whole goal of it is to identify what are those kinds of things, those little things that light you up. How do you get those things? Do you get them from being part of a group of people working together? Do you get them from discovering something? Like, are you the person who's in a lab on a microscope and you're like, aha, I found it. You saw something really amazing and you've discovered something really cool in that, or you see something differently than you'd seen it before. We all have those moments.
Yeah.
And if we proactively make a point of getting those moments in the kind of work we're doing, and in the way we live our lives, we're not going to get burned out. We get burned out when we stop seeing those things, and we feel like everything we do is a burden.
And often when people tell me, and people share, and I've felt it, I've experienced it. You start thinking, well, this thing that I like, that energizes me, it is not moving me forward in this objective of getting the degree. So actually I'll start doing it less, or I'll put it in the freezer and then I'll pick it up at the end after my degree. People are quitting these moments that spark, that recharge their batteries. They're quitting them, and then it's kind of, they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot in a way. It's a vicious circle that just
it's like taking away part of your nutrition that you need, and then going, oh, okay, I haven't seen the sun in 6 years.
Yeah.
No wonder I'm low on vitamin D, exactly. Right? But there are things like that you just need to, if it's something that lights you up and it makes you feel good and it makes you feel alive and it makes you feel on point, you want to do that thing.
Yeah. Of course.
And, it's important to give that time, because candidly, your time will be spent and more valuable. If you do something that gives you more focus, more clarity, and more joy, you're going to get more done faster. And net, the time you spent doing it probably is going to gain time for you, not lose time for you. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
It makes sense. It sounds paradoxical in a way, because I'm saying, well, I'm, keeping with the graduate school example, well, by keeping these activities, these moments, these experiences that are good for me in my schedule, in my week, I'm not eating at the time and effort and outcomes and production of my academic work. I'm actually going to improve it. I'm going to make it faster, and I'm going to have more fun or a better time doing it. So what's that magic? How does that happen? How does making space in a schedule for these moments actually then improve the work and focus and deep thought moments that come after?
You're the scientist. But I will tell you, in my experience, it happens and it works. I'll give you a beautiful example. I worked with a gentleman who has his own business. He has an SEO optimization business. Okay. And part of his time every day is spent making sales calls. Part of his time every day is spent focusing on actually doing the work that he's doing for his clients. And he had a small child, and he and his wife had bought a house 2 blocks from the beach because he loved to surf, and he thought he could have his own business and then he'd be able to surf during lunch or something. And he had this idea about surfing. And he was a very physical guy. He really needed movement in his day. And when the little boy was born, who was 3 when I was working with him, it started to be more about the kid in the time that it wasn't about him doing his work. And the next thing he knew, he and his wife decided that they wanted to have exercise be a family priority. So every morning they exercised, and I'm going to say this in air quotes, with their 3-year-old, which meant that my client stopped doing his, adult guy exercise and started doing whatever they did with a 3-year-old kid, which was basically playing with them and doing things that a 3-year-old could do. And so he was losing it as far as his physical activity went. And that was causing him to have less energy during his day and less, let's just say, mojo. Like his vibe was off, right? I discovered this doing the clarity session I told you about. It became very apparent the things that lit him up were physical things. And when we talked about it, it came out that he wasn't getting what he needed. And so we decided that at the following week that he would go surfing every morning. And he and his wife worked it out so he could surf every day. And he did. And he came back to me the week after and he said, "You're not going to believe this." And I said, "What?" He said, "I doubled my sales call volume last week." And it was because he was juiced. He was energetic. He felt good. He felt alive. Yeah. He came to the office and he banged out his phone calls. And before he was coming in kind of sluggish and he was coming out kind of sluggish, right? And the calls were more effective because he had better energy.
Sure.
And so that was, step one of what turned into, in a 12-week period, he doubled his business.
Wow.
And that was the first part of that. And it was just because we triggered that thing that lit him up. And it supercharged the value of the rest of the time. Now, let's say you're a research scientist and you go in pumped, and now you're more focused on what you're doing. That might mean you see something you didn't see otherwise. Or it might mean that you get more done, or you see it in a different way. And this is another piece of it that people don't really think about, is that when you cut out those things that you love, let's say you're a musician, you're really into music, and you used to play in a band, or you used to do whatever you did with music, and that inspires you and lights you up in a way. And then you have whatever your profession is. You may be carrying something into that profession and into how you approach it that comes from your music, or from your art, or from whatever your interest is. And I keep forgetting the name of this book. I need to find it. There's a fantastic book out there. This is going to be like that lawyer saying there's a case that says, there's this fantastic book that talks about how some of the best scientific discoveries and other kinds of advancements have come from people who are not in that realm. Like, it was a doctor who wasn't a biologist, for instance, coming into the realm of biology and applying what they'd learned in a different type of medicine.
Yeah.
Or, and because of those things, sometimes things have been discovered that wouldn't have been otherwise.
Yeah. And it feels to me that there's another aspect to it. Like, as I've met scientists who are also, let's say, musicians. They have their band, and and I'm thinking of a person, and it almost felt like, are you really a scientist? Can you be that relaxed in life? Because it was not the example that I saw in the department that I was, and this was in my undergrad. And and one thing I imagine, one factor is, if I'm nurturing this work aspect, let's say graduate school or this first job after my PhD, etc., but also I'm nurturing these things these interests that I bring from behind. The fact that I don't have all my eggs in just one basket means that if something is more tough at work, well, I can the other side kind of balances it out. Versus if I've left out for whichever reason these things that energize me, then if the thing that I said, okay, I'm going to put all of my effort into this, if that starts having difficulties, then everything is going wrong. So I'm sure that's part of also why it's not a good. It's also another reason why it's not a good principle to follow, or not a good behavior to have.
No, that makes sense. And what you see a lot of with people, that's when you get burned out, when you become so one-dimensional, that everything relies upon that one thing. And you feel like, frankly, people become suicidal because of this, because they feel like their life is useless or meaningless because the only thing that mattered is that one thing, and now that didn't work out. And they literally wrap that into their self-esteem, and that's, they don't see outside of that. It's a terrible place to be. But it also, like I said, as far as the bending time part goes, when you give yourself more, I'll call it fuel, coming from these things that light you up, it helps you get through the boring part and stay focused and then move on.
Before going on with my conversation with Michelle Niemeyer, I just want to let you know that going forward in the 7th season of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, I will have a section on the Papa PhD website where deals from guests or sponsors will be featured for you, the listener of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. So head over right now, if you want to take a little pause, to papaphd.com/sponsors and find the deals section where you will find the current offers. And now, let's go back to my conversation with Michelle Niemeyer.
And then the other pieces of it are learning to do things. And not everybody has control over this. I mean, obviously, if like you're a grad student and you're working in a lab and they tell you what to do and you're just doing your job, you don't have control over how the lab works maybe or whatever. But at some point, often, you might have the ability to say, I think we could do this differently to streamline this process. Or I could use the help of an undergrad here. Do you think we could get an intern? Or, to do this part of it, which anybody could be doing and doesn't require my expertise, so that I can focus on the part that matters and that I can give a bigger contribution. And when you can do that, and, depending on what your position is, where you work and whatever, but even if you're not in a high level job, if you have a way to present the solution, a lot of times an employer is going to be willing to hear it, especially if it's along the lines of, I bet some kid would be happy to do this as a free internship, So you might want to look at things like that as a way to offload the parts that are draining you and that could be done by somebody who has less expertise. That then becomes, you get more done at your level of impact, which will be higher. A classic example is, tracking things on a spreadsheet, that you could ask somebody else to do that, or you could prompt an AI to create it now. You don't even have to ask somebody. But there are things like that we can do to take away the drone work, the boring stuff, and put it in the hands of someone who might be even more effective and more focused than you are.
I think that's a great point. Of course, thinking about the lab example, it's not guaranteed that it's possible to get a student to help you, but just having the thought of asking and actually doing the action of asking, can somehow make things move and make maybe a supervisor understand that, maybe we're allocating her skills wrong, and she's going to even contribute more if we kind of rehash the way things are distributed. So that's interesting, the agency and self advocacy part of it.
For sure. Yeah. And if you don't ask, you'll never get anything. So it never hurts. Although, as someone who's been in a management position, managing people who were in these positions, it's always better to come with the solution as opposed to just complaining. Complaining doesn't get, that's not the way to approach it. But if you can come with a solution and say, here's how much time I spend on this, and part of it's because of this report that I have to create that takes me an entire day of every week. Mm-hmm. Is there a way that we can streamline that? I was thinking about it. We might be able to do it one of these multiple ways.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times people are happy to see a solution if they don't have to come up with it. Yeah. If it's not just somebody complaining and whining about what you've asked them to do, it's a lot easier to say, hey, wait a minute, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. In the preparation for the interview, I read something, that you wrote where you said, I think work-life balance is BS.
Yes.
And we hear this word so much, this term. Can you just share with the audience why you think that is? Because I know, and I see it, and I hear people using this term, and I think it's because we all kind of have an understanding of what the words mean, but what is this term or this idea that's going left and right in social media, etc.? Why do you consider it's BS?
Okay. We are whole human beings, right? So when you have this concept of work-life balance, a lot of times that means you have an idea in your head where you're putting your work in a box over here, right? Work's over here. You're putting your life in a box, life over here. Yeah, work is a big, significant portion of your life. It's, more than half your waking hours are usually spent at work. And there's one destructive aspect of it is just that nomenclature makes it seem like work is somehow not life. Work is negative. Life is good, work is bad. You're not supposed to enjoy work, or you're supposed to feel like you have to have a life. And, what that causes for a lot of people is a feeling of failure on both ends. They feel like they're not giving enough at work, or they're not giving enough at home, or both. And they're always trying to do this dance where they're spending, they might have an idea in their head with hours. I mean, we know now in France now it's illegal for an employer to email or text or call an employee outside of business hours. So, but when you think about it, sometimes, I don't know about you, I have an idea in the middle of the night, and I just don't want to not address that idea. If I were to text you in the middle of the night, I would not in a million years expect you to get back to me or even see that text. But I would be offloading it out of my head into a text. And likewise, when you're talking about the family balance, life balance, when we keep a line between all these things, we miss out on opportunities and potential that happen when we connect the dots throughout all the things we do. So let's use your musician as an example. your musician plays in a band and they're really excited about a certain aspect of their work world, and they never, ever, ever talk to anybody in the band about work, let's say, because they have this idea of work-life balance. That's my life. This is my work. They're struggling with an issue at work. And because they never talk to the people in the band about their work, they don't know that somebody's uncle is at a higher level where they work and could help them, for instance. Or maybe someone they know would have an idea, or they've done the thing before, they've made that pivot before, and they could help you with that process because they also went through a grad program and now they work at XYZ big company in your town or whatever it is. And when you choose not to have those conversations that cross lines, you just don't even know those opportunities exist. And so you miss out on them. And, one of the things I realized, and it was a long time ago, I used to go to these events I was a very specialized litigation attorney. I represented policyholders against insurance companies people whose claims hadn't been paid, in big companies and marine claims and a lot of different things. And I would go to this thing every year. And a lot of times people brought their spouses. And I saw the way the spouses were treated. And initially, because of my ex-husband's reaction, he didn't want to go back. After going a couple of times, he was like, I don't want to go to that thing. And I said, why not? And he said, well, because nobody knows how to talk to me. And they just he had literally had people turn their back on him because he wasn't a lawyer and he couldn't talk lawyer stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He was a chef. And they'd say, oh my God, that's so cool. You're a chef. And he'd start talking about it and they'd turn around and talk to somebody else. It was bizarre and it was really unfriendly and really inappropriate, frankly. There were a lot of people who brought spouses, way more women there who were spouses than men because litigation is a male-dominated part of law. So when I realized how my husband was being treated, I started cultivating friendships with the wives that I met at that event. And some of them were, one of them headed up a national philanthropic organization. One of them was a housewife who was really cool. They had renovated this historic home where they lived, fascinating woman. And I started getting invited to all kinds of stuff that her husband's firm sponsored during that event because she asked for me to be invited. And the thing is, if I had that work, that idea, I would have been doing what most of the other lawyers were doing and just talking to the other lawyers about our lawyer stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But by opening that door and making friends as opposed to just being a tool, hate to say it, of my trade, I was able to have better relationships that went beyond just a discussion about, what cases I was working on.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And some of the people that I've talked with and interviewed even for the podcast who report having had the best experience of graduate school have been people who have had some sort of wider community outside of academia. And it's true that in my experience in the lab, and for me it was life sciences, so it's, imagine lab coat, pipettes, whatever, there was this kind of culture of just talking about science. And of course the friendships that I kept mostly have been with people who had other interests and with whom we chatted about different stuff, and we connected for reasons other than what was happening on the bench. And it totally resonates with me what you're saying, and it kind of also connects with the importance that I try to convey to especially graduate students, because often they're shy in a certain way to reach out to people they don't know, especially if they are they are in industry and they're wearing suits and whatever. And I tell them, look, first, go talk with these people. If they're on LinkedIn, talk with them, ask them to tell you their story. They'll be happy to do it. But the other thing, and this goes, this associates with your precise example, is if you can, and if it's paid for, go to conferences where you're going to meet people in person, because that's a whole other level of just potential serendipity and randomness.
Oh, definitely. I hired someone in my law practice who worked for me for 4 years, who was a student at University of Miami, and she studied, at the time I don't remember what her major was before she went to grad school. She studied marine sciences ultimately at the Rosenstiel School, which is a great program they have at UM. And I was doing a lot of marine insurance litigation at that point. So I was attending events sponsored by the Propeller Club, which is a big trade organization for, shipping companies and all these different organizations that do marine related work. And so I met Taylor, my assistant at the time, because she was a student. I knew her through sailboat racing. I'd met her in a completely different context, and I ran into her at one of these Propeller Club events, found out that she was interested in that kind of thing, and said, how'd you like to work in my law firm part-time? And she worked for me for, like I said, about 4 years, and she was great. And now she has a completely different kind of career that's more in line with what she studied. But, she never would have asked me to work in my law practice, and I never would have known to ask.
Of course.
If she hadn't left the comfy, couch environment and gone and participated in, they had a student Propeller Club at UM, and they hosted events and attended our meetings.
That's super interesting. And each thing you're saying opens up a whole new conversation for me.
Yeah. And it's just, the thing is, I think the point to make here is that when you follow the things that light you up and make you happy, and you make room for that stuff, you're bringing your best self because you're like it. You're happy, you're joyful, you're connecting. And that will bring you other opportunities. It will bring you support. It may bring you knowledge about things you wouldn't have known about otherwise. And all of that helps to compress time in how long it would take for you to get from point A to point B if you were trying to do it by yourself without that connection.
No, for sure. And I'm thinking, like, as researchers, scientists, collaboration is key for everyone. Not only for scientists, I would say anyone, but very often when you're in that mindset of, okay, these things are going, I'm losing control of some things, or the outcomes are not what me or my supervisor expected, so I'm going to stop socializing, let's say, and double down, you just kind of falling into this rabbit hole, and you're isolating yourself. And this can lead to, mental health issues, but also it's kind of pruning these tendrils that you had that might bring unexpected solutions to an issue, and it's just counterproductive in a way.
Exactly. So that person who says, I don't have time as their first reaction, what they're actually doing is building a wall around themselves. And that wall, I like what you said about pruning, because it limits your ability to grow.
Yeah, it's my neuroscience background. Neurons, connections, pruning is part of this universe of mine. Amazing. Now, like I said, we're reaching the end of the interview, and you before the interview told me that you had a tool that you wanted to share with the audience that they can then use, that they can also anyway, and then you'll share how to find it in your on your website, etc. But can you let us know then what it is, how, in what situation to use it, how and what sort of outcomes people can expect by using it?
Yeah. So I have 2 tools that are basically the cornerstones of everything I do. One is the clarity exercise I talked about.
Yes.
I have a downloadable version where you can it's a guided meditation. It helps you identify those things that light you up, make you happy, give you joy, and figure out, okay, what are the things I need to proactively get into my life? And there are some journaling prompts as well, because as you know, people have different learning modalities. And for some people, a guided meditation is going to be better. And for some people, a written exercise may work better. So it has both. The other thing is what I call a SWOT analysis. It's just a form. It helps people look at, I with all of my coaching clients, I do this, and we have 3 different goals. We choose a 3 to 5 year big goal for your personal life, for your career, and then something else, whatever it might be. And so you take those 3 giant goals, and then you analyze where you are. The idea of it is you figure out, what do you already have? What do you have to get? For instance, do you have to save money? Do you have to get a license? Do you have to go to school longer? Do you have to get through a certain level of proficiency? Whatever that might be. And you figure out what the gap is. And then you also look at, what are the opportunities and the risks of doing this? And opportunities, maybe you'll get paid more. Maybe you'll have more opportunities in your career. Maybe it'll give you the opportunity to travel or to, have a certain type of career. And what are the risks? Do you have to give up most of your personal time? Are you going to have to, not see your kids most of the time, or miss out on vacations, or whatever those risks might be, or it's expensive, or it's maybe not guaranteed. And then I add a D for desire. The desire is literally, I say to people, 0 to 10, how much do you want it? And a lot of times after somebody's gone through all of this and they've really thought about, okay, here's where I am in my life now. Here's what I want in 3 to 5 years. This is this plan. These are the things I have to do to get there. Sometimes people are like a 6. And I tell people, if it's not an 8 to 10, why are you wasting your time on it? Because a lot of times it's not really what you want. It's what you've been taught to think that you should want. And it's when you're the person who's following the path that you were taught to think that you should want, often you're the one who's really open to getting burned out and being unhappy, because you're not doing what fulfills you. You're doing what somebody else has told you should be doing to be fulfilled. And there's a big difference in that. So if you can, use that and analyze and see where you stand. And then I go back to that a few times. We go back to it to build the team where we have gaps. Who do you know, for instance, who can give you information? Who's done this already? Maybe you want to take a year off and travel the world, and you want to know what that takes, but you don't really know anybody who's done it. Start asking around, find out who's done it, and meet with that person and pick their brain, find out what they can tell you, and have a few of those people. And, again, that shortens your time frame, because it's going to help you avoid the trial and error and the big mistakes that you would make if you know nothing and you try to do it on your own.
I'm sure it's going to be useful to the audience, to the Beyond the Thesis audience. Like I said, time management is one of those questions that comes again and again. And time scarcity, like we mentioned, is one of the first responses I get from so many young people when I'm trying to ask them to add one new habit to what they do, to work for a result that's a little bit far away, which is career clarity. All of these concepts that you shared are going to be useful for them for sure. What can you share for people to reach out to you, find your content, find your tools, and start playing with how they can bend time?
Okay, so the URL and what I'm telling you now will go to exactly the same place, which is a fill-in form. It will sign you up for a community which doesn't cost anything and has the tools I just told you about, the clarity analysis and the SWOT. And then sometimes I do little mini courses and things like that, and those are in there too.
Okay.
So that you can do it on a text by texting the word clarity to 33777.
Perfect.
So clarity to 33777. And that is a US number thing. If it doesn't work, add the 1 or something. I think that might,
that might do it perfect.
But if it doesn't work, the show notes, I know in a lot of the world outside the United States, it won't work. The show notes will have a link.
Perfect. And then your main website is michelleniemeyer.com. I also put that in the show notes. Michelle, this has been great. And I really appreciate how how you decided to choose bending time as the kind of main theme for what you're proposing, and the way you're helping people take back agency, and take back control of their time, because what we're talking about is kind of a perceived loss of that control. I really appreciate your reflection on how that perceived loss of control then leads us to artificially compartmentalize our life, and then kind of be juggling things, as if they're separate elements, when in fact they aren't. Our life is this continuum, and actually, when work and life, with air quotes, and family, or relationships, etc., are how can I say, connect and communicate. There's things that happen that you don't expect. There's serendipity there that you kind of eliminate if you compartmentalize too much. And the thing also that stays with me is that bending time, anyway, it's the way I'm interpreting it, is not, of course, that you can put 48 hours within 24, but it's that the idea you have of your 24 hours, because you are, you are compartmentalizing too much, and you maybe are also bringing into your daily day-to-day decisions things that other people, or pressure that other people are putting onto you, and then it's distorting your view. And I think bending it is just undoing that distortion, and just breathe and do your different things, live the different parts of your life in a healthier way. I think that's going to be useful for graduate students, young researchers, but also older researchers and people out there doing their thing. I would add to that just one thing, which is that, and I'm going to show you my dog toy. Okay. Yeah.
So when you bend time, and let's say you're talking about learning about your goal, that somebody that you can ask a question of, that person can give you knowledge, it speeds up the process. The work you're doing, you're more focused and you're more energetic because you're taking on better health habits. So you're focused and you get more done in the flow state. Yeah. All those things combine to take a path like this and make it into a path like that.
Yeah.
That's spending time.
Yeah, exactly.
In a nutshell.
Excellent.
So it's maximizing your potential while eliminating the waste.
Mm-hmm. And for those listening, Michelle was kind of representing those representations of a wormhole when we're talking about time space. Yes. It's finding this kind of very strange to the eye point of connection between two extremities of a sphere is what Michelle was showing. And
right. So instead of going around the long way, you're going through.
Exactly.
And you're possibly squeezing that space smaller and going through a shorter than just I guess you would call it the diameter, right?
Yeah.
Or the radius.
The circumference.
But circumference would be that's circumference, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. In any case, I think the image is clear.
Yeah.
Michelle, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great conversation. I'm super happy that we connected. And again, one of the great pleasures I have with this podcast. Sorry, my voice is cracking a little bit. One of my great pleasures with this podcast is, at least personally, this kind of these connections that happen that, we wouldn't cross paths on the street unless you came to Montreal or I went where you are. But now we did. We connected for an hour. Almost an hour. These two far points. We exchanged something, and then things get born of these connections. And if there's a last thing I really loved about what you said, it's the importance that connection and talking with other people has in the model that you're proposing. And I believe in that fully. And I think connection, especially if someone is kind of starting to go down the roller coaster of, I'm going to isolate myself, pull yourself out of it by talking with people a little farther away from your normal circle. That's going to be positive for you for sure.
Thank you. This has been such a great time, and I enjoy meeting new people, and I love that we got a chance to chat.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Have a question about this interview? Want to leave a comment about the podcast? Have someone you want to recommend to be interviewed? Go to speakpipe.com/PapaPhD and leave me a voice note. Just hit the big record button and leave me an up to 90-second message. I listen to all my messages and I consider all of them for feature on future episodes. speakpipe.com/PapaPhD. Hope to hear from you soon.